Weirding Way Media.
I believe in Thomas Hanks. I wish he went by Thomas. That would be better, right? Thomas Hanks. Richard, this podcast wasn't technically on the schedule of the episodes that I record on a Tuesday night, but I've gotten to the point now where if someone wants to do an episode, it's like, hey, let's just do it. And if it's a movie you want to do, let's do it. So this, I'm not blaming you because, again, like, I know I'm going to be in the fucking minority here. I had never seen this movie, but you brought this movie. You were like, I was like, Richard, if you could talk about a Tom Hanks movie that isn't the ones we're already doing, what would you pick? And you said
Big.
Right, which is not small. So so that's why on this episode of the Culture Cast, I am your harried host, Chris Dashy, because I think I might be taking flack for this episode. And I'm joined by my good friend. He is a producer. He has written the Mothman Prophecies. He is one of my close friends, and I am glad that he is here because few people have better conversations than the ones I get to have with my friend and yours, Mr. Richard Haddam.
Happy to be here, man. You're scaring me.
You're happy right now.
You're coming at me, and but I'm ready, man. Like I said, I'm ready. My faith is strong.
So yeah, on this episode, we're continuing Tom Hanks-uary, which is the terrible name that I came up with for this month, and we're sticking with it because it is terrible. We're going to be talking about 1988's film starring Tom Hanks that is one of his more well-known roles. We're talking about Big.
The laughs start rolling the minute Tom Hanks' legs crash to the floor, says Newsweek. Big is that rare film that will tickle the funny bone and touch the heart, writes People magazine.
It's even better than what the critics have said. It was very touching.
It was wonderful.
Tom Hanks is flawless.
Ejector seat!
An absolute delight, raves the New York Times.
Yeah.
But I'd really recommend it to anybody.
It was terrific. Want to go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Big, rated PG.
So the film is directed by Penny Marshall. It's written by Gary Ross and Ann Spielberg, and it stars Tom Hanks as a boy. Okay, let's walk this back. It stars David Moscow as a boy who wishes to be big, and he becomes or ages into Tom Hanks, playing the older version of David Moscow's Josh Baskin. And he gets into all sorts of trouble along the way. Richard, I want to know why we're talking about Big.
Big was better than it had any right to be. I saw it when it came out in 1988. And
how old were you?
Well, if it was 88, I was 22.
Okay. I was just curious because, like, I feel like there's a huge component of when you saw this movie that plays into this movie, right?
Yeah, I was sort of in between the ages. I wasn't 13 and I wasn't 30.
Okay.
I was sort of right dead in between. So right. I carried with me, the spirit of both. But so I saw it when it came out. Loved it. Everyone I knew, my contemporaries at the time, it was. I didn't see it with Matt, but I'm sure he saw it. It was one of those movies. I mean, it was sort of at the time kind of up there with not exactly Back to the Future or Die Hard, but it was sort of like, oh, that's sort of for our time the definitive way to tell this story and to do it with style and heart and humor. And you just can't beat Tom Hanks's performance. He was nominated for a Best Actor Academy Award, and I think that nomination is totally deserved. It's 90% just casting him at that point in his life, but he pulls it off with nary a false note. I'll say this. This is sort of my big comment. I enjoyed the beginning of the movie when I first saw it. But, you're watching a movie and you're kind of like, well, okay, well, this sort of makes sense. Well, it kind of doesn't make sense. Well, okay. And then when we get to the scene where he moves into the horrible hotel, the really cheap hotel in New York. And his friend leaves and he's on his own and he's sitting there and he can hear the guy in the hallway yelling in Spanish and he doesn't know what's going on and he starts to cry and he goes and he curls up on his bed and he's crying. And I'm like, yes, I'm in. That's true. That I buy. It's not going to be one of these movies where it's just, hey, I'm big now. I'm going to go to a bar on my first night and get drunk. It's like, oh shit, it's that thing where you go, but what if it really happened? And by doing some of that stuff up front, I think it buys a lot of goodwill for sort of the large middle portion of the movie, which gets a little trickier.
I had never seen this before, and I'm going to level with you like I've leveled with kind of everybody. Tom Hanks is not an actor that I gravitate towards. I'll tell you the same thing I told Father Malone and Heather. I consider Sheriff Woody to just be Sheriff Woody. I kind of always forget that it's Tom Hanks in a way, because there's not the voice is just so, I don't know. It's hard to describe it in a way that I could describe it to someone, but I don't think about it being Tom Hanks. It's just Sheriff Woody. But that's me. That's who I was. That movie was for people my age when it came out. And in a lot of ways, it's that role, Tom Hanks, that Big was for a lot of people in the 80s. It's the Tom Hanks role. I actually don't even know how for me there is anything else. And he's not even in Toy Story. It's just his voice. I mean, they weren't doing motion capture in the first movie. They didn't have him in a mocap suit. They may be doing that now, but they weren't doing that to begin with. It's all his voice and matching that up with the performance. But for me, that's Tom Hanks. Right. So what's funny about this movie, having never seen it, is I feel like I've seen this movie before without ever having seen it, because I knew everything about it because of how, no pun intended, big of a goddamn deal this movie is. It is as big of a deal as Die Hard and Back to the Future. It can't not be. Everybody, I mean, the Zoltar machine is so ubiquitous that I don't think there's any way getting around how big of a piece of pop culture this is for the 80s, more or less specifically, like you said, to the 80s. And I think also that's the issue with the movie, watching it in 2023, is there are some things about it that feel so 80s. Maybe it's like, it doesn't get in the way of the narrative, but they have to do certain things because it is an 80s movie.
There are certain movies. Well, it's kind of like when I show my kids The Shining. All right. And when they're watching it, what they're seeing is all of the reference points that set up all the gags and all the Simpsons episodes, right, and all the Family Guy episodes and all the sketch comedy they've ever seen. It's hard to come to these movies clean, literally 35, 40 years later, and not just sort of feel like, plus if it's a movie that visually or stylistically set a new trend, the impact sometimes doesn't hit you because you're sort of like, well, I've seen 75 movies that feel like this, but they all came after. So getting a clean view is tough. I see what you're saying. Also with 80s movies, it is an era, and it is an era of fashion and music and also filmmaking tropes. Right. So those exist also. The, sort of the way we're viewing corporate culture and, New York yuppie up and comers.
They're playing squash, man. Before it was called pickleball.
Is it John? That's John Hurd.
John Hurd, man. Yeah.
Which, by the way, I thought he was hilarious.
Oh, he's fantastic. I want to ask you something, though, that this is something that I don't want to lose, because this is something that I think is very interesting that you said about watching things with your kids. And I've never talked about it, but this is a show idea, genuinely. If I were to say to you, Big, don't talk to me about the movie. Tell me the first pop culture reference of Big that you could think of.
The first two things I would think of is the Zoltar machine and the piano.
I mean, okay, sure. So those are the 2 points that are normally referenced. I'm asking you, tell me a pop culture reference to Big, the first one you think of. When I mention Big, what is the first pop culture reference to Big you think of?
It's tough because it's not like there's catchphrases or famous lines that come from the movie in the way that, like we were kind of joking earlier about Bruce Willis's lines from also 1988's Die Hard,
right?
Where you can go, yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker, or you can go, come out to the coast, we'll have a few laughs. There's
John
half a
boy.
dozen lines.
John boy.
Welcome to the party, pal.
Well, okay. What's the first thing? What's the first pop culture reference you think of to Die Hard?
Well, again, when you say pop culture references, I guess I'm thinking, if I'm understanding your question, it would be quoting those lines.
I want to know what for me, it would be the first pop culture reference that I think of that's memorable for me to Die Hard, that I think of whenever I think of Die Hard, is the Ben Stiller show's version of Die Hard, where it's Ben Stiller pretending to be Bruce Willis doing it's like a trailer for Die Hard from the Ben Stiller show, but he's in a grocery store.
Okay.
Yabba dabba doobie dabba. That's
which I haven't seen, but
he sticks a grenade into a tomato and he throws it at someone. That's more what I'm getting at, because it's an interesting question. Because like you said, if I'm watching The Shining now, the thing that I think of immediately is the Shining from The Simpsons.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so with Big, I think of Robert Loggia and how much I love Robert Loggia from having seen him in Independence Day. He is my pop culture reference from Big, is Robert Loggia, and that's literally it.
Well, there's something else that happened when I was watching the movie this time, was that I was having this weird boomerang effect where I'm like, why is Robert Loggia why does this feel like such a familiar? And it's like, oh, Elf. James Caan was the head of the Kids Book Corporation in New York. And I'm like, oh, that's sort of urban New York tough guy who's sort of unexpectedly the head of a toy company or a children's book publishing firm in New York, where a wide-eyed, sort of youthful, naive character is wandering around New York, a city of cynical people. And I'm like, Elf owes a debt to Big. Different movie, different things. But I'm like, oh, there's a connection. If I was writing Elf, I'd be looking at Big.
I swear to God, dude, Jon Favreau, I'm sorry, folks, but you want to talk about Joss Whedon? Let's talk about Jon Favreau. Iron Man. The Mandalorian, Elf. Elf is you know what? Take all this other stuff away. You know what? In my opinion, one of the hardest things to do is make a modern holiday classic, because that's a damn near impossible thing. Elf is that. Elf is a modern holiday classic, and in a way that I cry at the end of that movie every single time. And I know when it's coming. I've seen it a million times. I saw it in theaters, probably like you did, maybe with your kids. I was 16, and that was the height of Will Ferrell. But Jon Favreau, the amount of pop culture influence that Jon Favreau will end up having has, obviously we don't know where his career ends up, but up until this point, they gave him Iron Man and said, you got to land this, man, because this is the opening salvo of damn near 20 years of content now.
Yeah, he's done some great stuff. Going back to Swingers,
he was in The Sopranos because of Swingers.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Well, I get that it's a different kind of experience to come at the movie now, but at the same time, I don't think it's that hard to sort of go, okay, pretend it's 1988. Pretend I'm seeing the movie. It's the 80s and I'm walking into a theater and seeing this. At what point in Tom Hanks's career am I seeing it? Have there been a lot of these body switching movies, 13 going on 30 and 18 again? When did all those movies come out? Did they come out before this, after this? Was this premise played out by this time?
That was after.
So all those movies were after this.
Yeah. Remember we talked about one, the Dudley Moore, Sean Astin one.
Right.
Which was kind of, again, it was I think that was 89. Something like that.
It wouldn't surprise me because this movie was big box office and critically acclaimed. So it's great, let's do some more of this. This is what people want. Let's do it.
Actually, Father Like Son, 18 again, vice versa, and 14 going on 30 all came out either in 87 or 88. So
shit.
So it's right there. But this is the one though. You know how many other movies came out like Home Alone that weren't Home Alone? I don't know, because Home Alone exists and those movies don't matter. Not to me, but in the grand scheme of the pop culture conversation, whatever movie that is trying to do Home Alone is just going to get compared to it, to the point where Skyfall gets compared to Home Alone, the final segment of that movie. I mean, again, again, like you have a guy setting traps, but I'm like, that's also Straw Dogs. Like,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. It's not like Home Alone invented that, but it is funny that so many of these movies came out right at the same time. It would have made more sense to me if those were all like early 90s, like everyone trying to capture it.
Well, they feel like it, don't they?
There were a lot of Die Hard ripoffs. I wrote one of them that came out in the 90s, but it's not like the year Die Hard came out, there were 4 other movies about one cop against 12 terrorists in different environments, Oh,
my name is Richard Haddam, and my cachet is I ripped off Die Hard. What is this, like, tell the truth? One of these people is a screenwriter that wrote a film.
If you want a more nuanced conversation, listen to our other episode where we discuss it at length. But for now,
God,
Die Hard ripoff
multiple times.
But anyway, but for me, what makes this movie worth returning to is 2 things. Primarily Tom Hanks's performance, which I think is close to flawless. He really, I really feel like he was able to get at the physicality and sort of the emotional center of being kind of a good kid who's a 13-year-old, but like a decent 13-year-old, not an asshole 13-year-old, who he certainly is at the beginning of the movie. He's just like a nice kid, and let that come out in a way that doesn't become cloying or overdone. There are some moments that go over the line for comedy, when he's spitting out food and stuff like that, which I enjoy because the comedy has impact. But his performance and Penny Marshall's direction are really just spot on. I mean, I didn't find a lot of false notes or wrong moves. And Barry Sonnenfeld's photography, which I don't want to give him too much credit for, except that because he is so idiosyncratic and his camera work is typically extremely identifiable. And then he went on to be a director with a very identifiable style. I think the movie is actually beautiful to look at. Some of the fashion is 80s, but wow, when they're on the trampoline, it's just it's a great moment of Tom Hanks just, this is what I want to do on a date. Her sort of trying to go along and like feeling like an idiot, and this is Elizabeth Perkins I'm talking about, and then finally getting into it, and then we cut outside and we just see these 2 figures bouncing in the windows. It's just beautiful.
I agree with you about Tom Hanks's performance, obviously. I think the thing that he does that's really hard to do is to make it not feel like an adult playing a child, but play it as an adult, as a child, let me rephrase this. Playing a child playing an adult, and you're having to be the adult playing that child playing the adult. That's the hard thing to do. And I think to your point, I don't think anybody else has really done it this well since, again, before is unimportant. This is the performance that everybody comes back to for this kind of movie. And it is because it's Tom Hanks, and Tom Hanks, look, if Tom Hanks wasn't who he was now, would people be talking about this movie? Yes, because it's still a great performance, but it's also further embellished because he is Tom Hanks. On the last episode, we talked about The Burbs. It was a weird thing that at one point in that movie, he's watching Mr. Rogers, who he would go on to play in a movie and be nominated for an Oscar for. Like, well, that's a weird thing, but also that's who Tom Hanks is. He, I think, is, for a lot of people, and you might agree, the quintessential American actor for a certain generation of people.
There was a point, I think, in the 90s where it was sort of like, is he going to be Jimmy Stewart? Is he going to be a guy who like does multiple genres, and he'll do comedy and drama and, just sort of and sort of just consistently represent what America thinks of as the best of itself. And I think Forrest Gump, in a weird way, was almost the apotheosis of that notion
for a certain generation, for sure.
Right. And the fact that he was playing a simpleton makes it even more accessible for all Americans. Like what you don't get a lot is you don't get a lot of Tom Hanks playing sort of traditional cop roles, traditional lawyer roles.
No. The movie he plays a lawyer is about as atypical as atypical can get.
Right? You're talking about Philadelphia.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, of course.
He in a way he didn't do what Jimmy Stewart did, which was prove I can be the cowboy, the best cowboy icon of all cowboys. I can be a World War II icon of a World War II, fighter. I can be just an American man in the Capra movies. I can be a romantic lead in Hitchcock films. Jimmy Stewart was able to do all of these things and still maintain his Jimmy Stewartness. Jimmy Stewart never decided, I'm going to do weird, unexpected stuff. I'm going to play Colonel Tom Parker in Elvis.
I mean, maybe that is something that should have been walked back from everything that I've heard.
Yeah. Now look, Tom Hanks is allowed to do whatever he wants. He's earned it and he's great and he's beloved. I mean, he's beloved in a way. I don't know how many other actors.
I don't, that's what I'm saying. Like, I think we talk about Indian cinema rather frequently. I think Tom Hanks is as close as an American actor gets to the level of an Amir Khan or a Shah Rukh Khan or an Amitabh or a Rajnikant. I think Tom Hanks is the only actor that comes even 1/100th, because again, I think it's a huge, we're talking 4x the amount of people being interested in one person in India versus a quarter here. But like Tom Hanks, I think, is a actor that is American, but also is beloved everywhere.
Right. And for Americans, I think there's a sense of like ownership of the entire Tom Hanks icon. And the number of people who like I've been involved in 50 conversations in my life about the fact that Tom Hanks is actually a really nice guy.
And that's real.
Yeah. And people who have worked with him and it's just like, oh my God, he's the greatest guy. Like he understands that he's Tom Hanks, but he goes onto a movie set and he knows everyone's name down to the last grip, and he hangs out at lunch and he tells stories and he plays basketball. And suddenly you're just like, how am I friends with Tom Hanks? But he's just such a good guy. And in a way, that's as important as anything else. Like there's not a lot of conversations about who Harrison Ford really is. There's not really even a lot of conversations, except weird conversations, about who Tom Cruise really is. But it feels important for Americans to be able to go, and he's a good guy. Like if it was revealed that I think it'd be worse than Bill Cosby. If it was revealed that he was secretly up to bad shit, like in a way, Bill Cosby is sort of like, wait a second, Bill Cosby was beloved too. And that was horrible when that came out. I think it'd be even worse with Tom Hanks in a way.
Here's a point of reference that we maybe all forgot, but I haven't, because again, I have a memory that sometimes hurts me. Do you remember the week that the pandemic started here? What one of the three big events were the day everything kind of stopped?
Yeah,
Tom Hanks got
Wilson
COVID, fucking COVID. That was a big deal. How is that a big deal if he's not the biggest of big deals?
No, that was like, if Tom Hanks dies of COVID, I'm telling you, the pandemic would have taken a different trajectory.
Yeah,
the reaction, the political reaction. I mean, like literally, it would have been like, you've got to be fucking kidding me. It would have been devastating.
And that's the thing. I mean, you mention it. I spoke with her a while ago for an episode that we did on Xenon, a Disney Channel movie. Holly Folger. She is friends with Tom Hanks because I guess she went to school with him or acted with him in theater or something to that effect. And I've seen pictures of her with him, just like a normal dude. And it's just like, in a way, and this may seem hyperbolic, it's like, good God, walking amongst us. Like, how can you be this person? And also, like you said, a person that I guess just, if you know that, if you're Tom Hanks and you know that you're Tom Hanks and you're self-aware of that, that's all that means. That's all that means, apparently, is he knows he's Tom Hanks, but he has never let it get to his head.
Right. And he, I think he is very grateful for the career that he's had. I think he was, I don't want to get into a big discussion of every movie he's ever done, but he was doing Bachelor Party and Was The Burbs before this or after this?
The Burbs was 7.
Okay, so it was before. Yeah, there was a point where he was kind of doing the wacky comedies that weren't really.
Excuse me, The Burbs was 89.
It was 89. Okay.
But I mean, like, they're like effectively shooting this probably around the same time, right?
See, it's funny. Like, I would hold Splash up in my memory, and I haven't seen it recently, but Splash sort of felt like more of a sort of classic 80s romantic comedy that was centered. You were safely centered with Tom Hanks and John Candy, and of course Daryl Hannah. But she was not. She was playing a very idiosyncratic role. But you were like, oh, Tom Hanks can sort of pull this off. He's playing the everyman romantic lead in a romantic comedy. Got it. I think this, even more so in a way, sort of cemented an element of his personality that allowed him then to go on and do other acting challenges that weren't just, hey, put Tom Hanks in a comedy. It was like, hey, let Tom Hanks be an actor. That's what this movie did.
Is this the through line to Forrest Gump? Is it totally. Right? Like, that's what this feels. That's what this feels like. It's like this is the acting. This is the audition. Like, this is the tape you wish you could get from anybody trying to audition for that role. An entire performance that you would be able to see.
Right. And to see Forrest Gump first, and to see Tom Hanks playing a role of sort of a mentally diminished person whose main characteristics are being a good guy, being extremely loyal, being naive. It's sort of like it's the same but different. And then to go back and look at this, it would be strange. But I think Zemeckis had to have been thinking, well, wait a second. What he pulled off in Big is a flavor close to what we're trying to do in Forrest Gump. We're trying to get at a purity that allows us, that we can believe, that you couldn't believe. And it's so funny to hear about the other actors. And I had no idea, but there were one of the other actors who almost did this role in Big was Robert De Niro.
Yeah.
And it's like, Robert De Niro is a great actor and he does great things. And King of Comedy is one of my favorite movies.
Can you imagine that though? Like, I am big.
It'd be it would be a very different movie. I mean, in an alternate universe, I'd like to see that movie, but really this was a miracle of casting. And the fact that they went through so many people before they got to him. And then you just look at his face and you're like, yes.
Just think 4 years later, De Niro, what's even funnier is 4 years later, De Niro would be attempting to be passing himself off in Goodfellas as a 30-year-old, because at the beginning of that movie, when De Niro meets young Henry Hill, he's supposed to be like 30 years old, and he looks like a fucking 50-year-old man there. They put some black shoe polish in his hair. It's like, and if it had been this, it would have been like, oh dear God.
In Goodfellas, De Niro appears to be the exact same age from beginning to end.
Yeah, well, they give him those big glasses. They're like, that's enough.
Yeah. They do a thing, but it's like, that's De Niro. Which is, good and bad. But.
Right. I think Gary Busey, having been someone who auditioned for the role in this movie, is a lot more troubling. But Penny Marshall apparently not thinking he could pull off playing an adult was apparently a bridge too far.
Right.
I don't know. Like it like you said, like it feels like if it's not Tom Hanks, this movie doesn't matter.
Right. And so part of it is that miracle of casting. It's not the kind of role that you can think of 5 people who could pull it off. There's other roles that it's like, well, yeah, I suppose maybe this one, that one. And then Penny Marshall. And Penny Marshall is a director, in my opinion, who does not get her due. She has made a handful of fantastic movies. Big is one of them. League of Their Own totally holds up. Awakenings.
She's really funny in Hocus Pocus, actually.
Wait, is Penny Marshall in Hocus Pocus?
Yeah. So do you remember when the 3 witches go to what they perceive to be the devil's house? The wife of the guy in the house is Penny Marshall, which is where I know her from. And the funny thing is that the devil is played by none other than Gary Marshall.
Okay. Well, see, now
it makes sense.
The difference of the generations. For my generation, Penny Marshall is Laverne from Laverne and Shirley.
Right.
So I'd known her as an actress for years and years and years. and she was even on The Odd Couple. So, and of course, these are Gary Marshall shows, but actress in her own right. And then to me, I always conflate it because she was married to Rob Reiner, and Rob Reiner is a director who also did, 5, 6, 7 of the greatest movies of the genres that he's doing: A Few Good Men, Misery, This Is Spinal Tap, When Harry Met Sally, Stand By Me. I mean, it's just like, wait, the same guy made all those movies. No one ever talks about Rob Reiner as like this amazing director. He's an amazing director.
I thought this was a Rob Reiner movie.
Well, because they were doing what they were doing.
But that's how good this movie is more to my point. Like, it's so competently and beyond competently directed. Like, I'm with you. Rob Reiner is amazing. Like, This Is Spinal Tap is one of the few mockumentaries that is worth watching. Like, there's a lot of real bad ones out there.
And it was kind of the first. Like, no one knew what the fuck it was.
Yeah.
I swear to God, that first weekend it came out, I think half the people walked out thinking it was real.
So 2-word review, Richard. Shit sandwich.
Nobody, like, it wasn't, 15 years after The Office, it was just like, wait, what is this?
Right. Yeah. I believe it.
So okay, Penny Marshall, Rob Reiner both grew up in show business families, grew up with storytelling and filmmaking in their blood and also in the air around them. You're looking at someone who, now there's, Barry Sonnenfeld famously talks about how difficult it was working with Penny Marshall, that she couldn't make a decision. It's like, well, I don't know. Should Elizabeth Perkins be a blonde or a redhead? Well, shoot all of her scenes as a blonde, then shoot them all as a redhead, and I'll decide later. And he's like, we can't do that. Like, we got to decide now.
Do you know how money works?
But here's the thing, it's like when it's Francis Ford Coppola, it's funny and amazing. And he's a genius when he goes 100 days over schedule and $10 million because he's going to do a thing a certain way. And it's got to be this and that.
I see what you're getting at.
But when a woman does it, these wacky dames,
can't make up their minds.
Can't make up their minds. And it's sort of like, you know what? I don't care, because I don't know what goes on behind the scenes. All I know is what's on the screen, and what's on the screen is great. And you know what? Not just this one, but 5 others. So somewhere in there, she had to be a pretty talented storyteller and director. Plus the fact that, again, the performances in this movie, like, I remember thinking back and thinking, well, obviously I like Robert Loggia. And I remember liking Tom Hanks and his friend and thinking, wow, those are good performances. Like these are performances that could get really annoying, and they're very endearing.
Right.
But I think, I'm not a huge Elizabeth Perkins fan, but I think that the job she was given in this film, which was tricky, she pulls it off beautifully. And I think John Hurd playing a character that is the kind of character that I hate. And now I'm looking at it and going, oh, that could have just been a character who was a dick that you just hated. But instead, he was a dick who was also extremely funny. I mean, he had 5 big laughs in the movie where you just love him. He's a jerk, but you love him. You're like, oh, okay. But when he's making fun of Josh and the way he talks, and just sort of like being childish, So when that great line comes, and by the way, screenplay, amazing, also nominated for an Academy Award. So many funny lines, so many just like, oh, that's just perfect. But when Elizabeth Perkins is breaking up with John Hurd, and he's like, what, you're going to him? Why him? And she goes, because he's a grown-up. It's just like, and you get exactly what she means, and it's totally honest, and it's totally hilarious. So many, he opens up his check, $187. I know, it's criminal, isn't it? John Lovitz.
Oh my God. John, I think John Lovitz has, I think a lot of people don't like John Lovitz, right? I'm sure a lot of people find John Lovitz's thing to be annoying, but yeah. I kind of love John Lovitz.
Oh yeah, I love John Lovitz.
And also, as a fan of Phil Hartman, I will always be a fan of someone who went up to Andy Dick and almost killed him because I guess Andy Dick said, "I'm going to put the Phil Hartman curse on you, John Lovitz." And John Lovitz, obviously SNL cast member during Phil Hartman's tenure on the show, went ballistico on Andy Dick, and because the whole rumor or theory is that Andy Dick is the one who gave Phil Hartman's wife the drugs and got her rehooked which caused all of the terrible things to happen. So I'm always going to be a huge fan of John Lovitz, even just as a person. But I actually like, I think he kind of gets equated to someone like Rob Schneider, just because he's kind of in that same character actor who often says something annoying or in a weird way. But I really like John Lovitz as an actor because he always plays such weird characters. Like, that's a guarantee. Always, there's something just strange about him. Like,
he's memorable, and then he's gone. I mean, he only had a couple of scenes, and they were both really funny. I mean, and again, I mean, I could quote 5 lines from this movie that are, classic, but they all come from that deep sort of like, wow, you guys really sat back for a second and went, what would a 13-year-old do? One of my favorite bits is when he goes to cash his check, and with his friend, the woman's like, how would you like it? They look at each other, they go confer, $187.30. And they come back and they go, 3 dimes, $100 bill, and 87 ones.
And then she starts counting.
Yes. I mean, it's so good. It's like they always step past the easy laugh for the honest laugh. And it really, it's what allows the movie to last 35 years.
I completely agree. I mean, it feels like a movie that, again, for all intents and purposes, there are other movies just like this, and they don't work half as well, 2/3 as well. They're not getting nominated for anything. They're essentially relegated to the, and also you might like, bin of Netflix, because if you watch this movie, it's like, well, I don't really want to watch anything else talking about this thing, because I think like you said, it has an emotional core at the center of it. And that is not something that any of these other movies, for the most part, have any interest in getting involved in, because it's hard to do, because it's not easy, because the cheap laughs don't work in a movie with an emotional core.
Well, and also quite often these movies, well, sometimes, I mean, there's like this is not quite a body switching movie. It sort of is, but it's not 2 different people in each other's bodies. And now you're watching 2 people try to navigate. And what happens quite often is that it turns into farce, where it's just scene after scene that is sort of like Mrs. Doubtfire, where it's like, oh my gosh, I've got to get to the place before the thing finds out that the person, and now they know, and oh my God. And it gets a little sweaty and tiresome. This movie dispenses with all that. They're like, now we're just going to tell a story about a guy who got his wish and is now trying to figure things out. He touches in with his mom a few times, so that's taken care of. It's like, okay.
Which I think those scenes are pretty great too. I mean, again, a lot of physical comedy from Tom Hanks, who not known. Again, so many people, I think it's the biggest shame about Tom Hanks in a lot of ways. Like, so many people now younger than me don't know Tom Hanks for his actual funny comedic stuff. Because I love Tom Hanks in Dragnet. That's probably my favorite Tom Hanks outside of Sheriff Woody. He's so good in that movie. I mean, Dan Aykroyd walks away with that movie after scene 2, but Tom Hanks is a really funny actor, and he has really good comedic timing, like pitch perfect comedic timing. And
the physicality. You're totally right. It is a classic performance that is such a pleasure to watch. And you're right, because it's weird, but you're right. He hasn't done a ton of comedy in the last 30 years. It's been mostly dramatic roles, which have been very good, but you do sort of go, oh, right. He started out as one of the bosom buddies.
Right. Exactly. Like that, like, come on, guys, like Joe versus the volcano.
Yeah. Well, there's opportunities now for people to go back and they can see this stuff. And again, it was surprising to me. It's like, oh God, he really did look young. I mean,
right.
It's like, at the time, it's just like, oh, that's what Tom Hanks looks like. But now it's like, oh boy, he is a kid. I wonder how old he was when he did this movie.
So this movie came out in 1988 and he was born in 1956. So he would have been
32,
which is crazy because that's how old I am. And he looks, dude, I'm saying that only because he looks, okay, I know people say this about me, that when I shave my facial hair, I look younger than I am. And I have been mistaken for someone 5 to 7 years younger than me, not bragging or anything. Tom Hanks in this movie looks like he's 18.
Yeah. Yeah.
He looks like half his age.
Well, because he's got those features. He's almost. I mean, his features are elfin. If he turns sort of 3/4, he's got this nose that sort of curls up, and these eyelashes, and these sort of peering out of these eyes.
The lines around his mouth too. Yeah, and the big poster really accentuates exactly what you're talking about. I've never equated it with that, but it is. It's like it is elf-like. Like Lord of the Rings elf-like, like that kind of elf.
And what's really cool is that the poster that I remember the poster, which was his face kind of smiling in that mischievous way. But I forgot the tagline was, have you ever had a really big secret? And then just him with that smile. And you're just like, oh, I want to know what the secret is. Like this is great. I want to know. It's not like two people back to back pointing at each other. And it's like, oh my God, will they ever get this sorted out? And
Danny DeVito, Arnold Schwarzenegger, twins.
Right.
there you go. That's what you literally, I was assuming that's what you were going for.
Well, yeah, it's the oh my God, will something wacky happen and things are going to be wacky.
It's heightened reality, baby. You know what? That's the thing. I do like the narrative construct that this movie lives within, because I love these heightened reality or fantastical reality movies. Because again, like the Zoltar machine grants him his wish. He actually grows up and ages. Like that actually happens. It's not a dream. They don't pull up at the last second and, oh, you got conked on your head there, pal. Like they do in so many of these movies where it's like you got hit on your head and you went back in time and then you wake up and you're right back where you were. It's like, so did it happen? Didn't it happen? Like this, it's like, no, it happens. And I appreciate that, like you said, they address it at the end with him and Elizabeth Perkins. That was the part of the movie I wasn't expecting. And that was the part of the movie that I appreciated the most, is the two of them at that Zoltar machine at the end of the movie. Because that's what puts the movie over the top into something where someone who is 30 is having a dialogue with someone who's not, but they understand why the person who isn't 30 is feeling the way that they feel. But they know that when they get to their age, they're going to understand it. They just can't right now. Even no matter how hard they try to explain it, there's nothing that they can do.
Well, and exactly, again, by skipping over the, any concern of plot and exposition and just going straight to the emotion. It's just, you're so tied in. By the way, let's give credit to the kid. What is the actor's name again?
David Moscow, who I know from Newsies, which is a weird trip of a movie to watch, because you know who he stars opposite in that movie, right?
No.
A 15-year-old singing and dancing Christian Bale.
Oh, right.
Which is a trip.
What did we watch? Oh,
Empire of the Sun. Yep.
That's
Jinx, you owe me a Coke. but that again, it ties back to this idea of like, I'm sure Christian Bale wasn't 15 in that movie, but he's playing a pretty believable kid here. David Moscow plays a very believable child in this movie without feeling and heading into the precocious little shit territory, which is the easiest territory to fall into with having children in your film. Not the actors, but the way you're writing them. Most child actors aren't precocious anything. They're just reading the script the way it's written. It's the writers who don't know how to write children, which it's like writing so many other things. It's hard to write something that you're not.
Yeah. And they managed to get a performance. I mean, first they cast this kid who I have to assume, obviously he and Tom Hanks had both been cast. So now it's a matter of, okay, Tom Hanks looking at the kid and going, okay, so I'm playing a 13-year-old, but I'm playing that 13-year-old.
Right.
And then also the kid sort of going, okay, I've got to modulate my performance so that for the rest of the movie, you can buy that Tom Hanks is me. So I'm going to try to, in a weird way, do my best young Tom Hanks. And he just really comes across as a decent, real kid,
right? Not
overly smart, alecky, obviously very vulnerable. He's got a crush on a girl that, I mean, it's so perfect. And it's very efficient. It's just, he really likes that girl. The girl's nice to him, but she's a head taller than he is, probably a little older, and she's dating a guy who can drive. And that doesn't make her a bitch. It's just sort of like, and then they get to the front of the line. Sorry, kid, you're not big enough to ride the ride. And it's just like, oh, you want to die. That poor kid. And he just walks away. And it's like, why am I stuck in this life of mine. And the other nice thing is they don't overdo it. It's not like, oh, I'm getting beaten up by the school bully and I'm getting picked on, by an older sibling. And, my teacher makes fun of me and everything in my life is terrible. It's like, no, it's like it's just enough for you to understand and remember. Yeah, I remember that when you're kind of at that in-between age. You've got a friend, you have chores, you got to go to school, and you're starting to think about girls. And yeah, you wish you were big because you don't know what else to wish for. And the Zoltar thing is just so beautiful.
Well, I mean, it's one of the smartest things that the movie does is it gives it a kind of timeless point of reference, right? Because I'm not saying that those machines are on every street corner now, but even someone 10, 12, 15 years younger than me would have a point of reference for what that is, a fortune-telling machine. And that's what makes it feel so timeless. Yeah, I mean, the 80s stuff in this movie feels really 80s. Most of the time he's at his office. It's like, it's almost in a lot of ways he's stepping into a different movie, but it works because it's that different movie is the perfect kind of movie for this character to step into, to cause havoc and be kind of subversive and subvert what your expectations are. But yeah, like that point of reference with the Zoltar machine is obviously that and the piano are two of the smartest things in this entire movie. But those are the two things that I think everybody remembers, obviously. Again, I had never seen this movie, but I knew of the piano scene and I knew of the Zoltar, who, again, how could you not? It's just part of, again, the pop culture framework of at least our current American pop culture zeitgeist. I mean, it's still part of it. They're releasing a Funko Pop Zoltar. They did, and you can buy a Zoltar machine. I'm pretty sure that they were making full scale reproductions of it, even. So,
I want that. Right?
See what I mean? Like, I get it, and I totally get it.
Yeah. Now, to me in the rewatch, the sort of what I'm going to call tricky part of the movie, which I still think was pulled off pretty well, is the relationship between Josh and Elizabeth Perkins' character. And, you're sort of watching it and I'm trying to remember what's going on. And then as I'm watching it, I'm realizing, okay, so early on, Tom Hanks is not really attracted to Elizabeth Perkins because to him, she's a grown-up.
Right.
So there's just something instinctual still inside him that's like, well, you're like my teacher's age. So you're a grown-up. You're a grown-up lady. And I appreciated the fact that it was a real slow burn and a slow build before he was sort of like, oh, I think she likes me and I think I like her too. Okay. Now, what I didn't remember was how far they go, although it makes 80s sense that they would sleep together. Now, watching it as an adult, I'm like, okay, what are we really saying here? He knows that he's 13, but now he's in an adult's body. He's going to sleep with her. Okay, I get that. But man, would it be weird to be Elizabeth Perkins and go at the end of the movie, okay, in a way, I slept with a 13-year-old child.
Yeah. That was what I hinted at it's very 80s. That is like, look, if it came out in 2023, they would hang a fucking lantern on it in 2 seconds, like they do with everything. Isn't it weird? Or aren't you banging a 13-year-old? That's literally the line that would be in the 2023 version of
in
this
the trailer
movie.
For sure.
Right, exactly. Aren't you banging a 13-year-old this summer? Like, no.
Well, yeah.
It's none of that. Like, but it is like it's handled, like you said, it's handled about as well as you can handle it if you're gonna broach the topic in this kind of movie.
Because again, they lean away from, it's like, ooh, he's a 13-year-old in a 30-year-old's body. He's been let loose in the candy store. They're not going to a strip club,
Again, that would be the 2023 movie.
Well, it would be any era movie where they just decided, okay, this is what the kids want.
Right.
Again, not giving it a lot of thought. They clearly gave it a lot of thought, from the script to the director to the actor, so that when they are crossing that physical barrier and she's taken off her shirt, but she's still wearing a bra, and he's sort of like, it's tricky, but you're watching a 13-year-old wrap his mind around, I'm going to touch a breast for the first time. And you can do a movie where a teenager is having a first meaningful sexual experience that they're trying to wrap their head around even as they're having it. And those have been done, and they can be done really well. And that's what this is. And as an audience, you're in both of their minds. You're like, okay, he's like, I have never done this before, but I'm at a point in a relationship with a person where I like her, she likes me, so this is okay. I just got to get used to the fact that this is going to happen. And then you're like in her mind going, well, what is she thinking? Like, what? It's 88. What have her recent sexual experiences? What have they been like? And was it with someone who was approaching her with this sort of wondrous respect and awe, or was it like, come on, baby, let's get down to it? Because it was 80s and she's an adult. And it's like, does she think he's weird, or is this kind of like great? Like, oh, you're not in every other way. You're not like every other guy. You're not like every other guy in this way too. And again, it helps you step by step, not physically reject the reality of what's happening in the movie.
It's smart. It's like the smartest way I feel like it's been done in one of these movies. Because again, like you said, it's body swap adjacent. And because it's not a body swap movie, that's what makes it work with the physical relationship. And the fact that it is him aged up in his own body, not him switching bodies, or the old version of himself also exists at the same time. There's none of that.
Well, and the great thing about doing a movie like this, where you sort of declare up front, look, guys, we're playing emotional truths and we're telling an emotional story. We're not just telling a plot about a guy who's got to find a Zoltar machine and put everything back before midnight.
Right. There's no ticking time bomb in this movie. There's not a single one. I mean, like you said, in all these other ones, there's a narrative ticking time bomb in every one. Yeah. They're leaving with the talisman, or the juice in the potion runs out. It's like none of that here.
No. And what you have then is just, again, you're just following these characters, and it lets you have a scene like the one at the end where he goes to the Zoltar machine and she shows up, and there's not a lot of time that has to be spent with, wait a second, okay, so this machine somehow is magic? Like, I don't understand. Was it struck by lightning?
Yeah, right. Where did it come from? I want a prequel movie about the Zoltar machine.
Yeah, we don't need to see her, freak out. She's just like, oh God,
she understands it in that one scene without even saying anything.
Yeah, she's like, but how could I have known? Like, how could I have, like, all the clues were there, but the answer is so strange that how could I, and then she's just playing the emotion of, okay, you really aren't, you tried to tell me, it makes sense. I don't know what to do now. Clearly you're going to change back, and I get it. And he's very honest, it's just, he's not going back because he's got to give a book report. He's going back because it's like, I'm a kid. I'm not up for this. I can't, it's fun. I like you. I cannot be a legitimate romantic partner for you. I can't be an adult in that way. I think I just need to go back and hang out with my friends, go to my mom.
Which like that scene that was the moment in the movie that got me, when he was standing on the street and he was hearing all the noises. I mean, that's why Tom Hanks was nominated for an Oscar. Stuff like that. Like the scene in the bedroom at the beginning of the movie, the scene at the end of the movie. But it's those small, quiet moments that no other actor would be able to pull off in a movie like this, because nobody else has.
So I totally forgot, because it's been a long time since I've seen it. But when his friend was like, tearing things off the wall of his bedroom, and he's all upset, and he's like, I'm not your friend anymore. And then the little walkie-talkie comes to life in the trash can. And I was like, oh, it's going to be Tom Hanks outside going, I'm ready. Let's go find the Zoltar machine. I literally thought, it's like, oh, that must be what's happening. And the fact that he looks out his window and it's his mom. Oh my God, that killed me. It's just like, oh, that poor woman. She is still, it's been weeks, and she's in his bedroom talking to his childhood friend. And it's just like, oh my God, this is breaking my heart.
Well, and that's the weird part of this movie, is the like subplot or subplot of the mom and like He's been kidnapped. I mean, it's the weird thing that the movie has to do to try to explain away how he is away, but not essentially like deemed dead. So I guess he quote kidnapped himself essentially. Yeah. But like it's so like depressing and weird. Like for this movie, like it makes total sense, obviously, but it's very strange.
It's melancholy. It's like they play the one moment and they start a thing where it's like, oh, they're going to try to investigate him and they're going to find out, you know what? There was a kid named Joshua Baskin who went missing 6 weeks ago. And they even show him on the milk carton. Right. Thank God they don't do that. Cause again, that's a bunch of plot that we don't give a shit about. Like you really think at a certain point, John Hurd's going to walk him and go, that guy you love, guess who he really is? And, holds up the milk carton. He's a 13-year-old kid. How smart do you feel now, lady? And there are movies that would do that.
I was about to say, in a crappier movie, they would totally have that scene.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, no, again, all we're dealing with is a hard-charging New York yuppie dude who can't understand the innocence and guilelessness of this new guy. And it infuriates him, and he's got to figure out a way to beat him, even if it's just on the squash court. And why do you like that guy? I'm the guy who's working hard and going to get the big account and get the corner office. And so that part of the story is about 80s avarice. It's the anti-Wall Street, Gordon Gekko, greed is good. It's a moment of her character really goes through an arc. She starts out like, just, smoking cigarettes and being, fucking Faye Dunaway. She's like, oh, how do you like that? She's totally arch and on a path to success. And she's as amped up as John Hurd is. But we see her go through, she is affected by Josh. We see her sort of slowly over the course of the movie go, what am I doing? Why am I so miserable? Why does it have to be miserable? He's not miserable. He works at a toy company. He's having a good time and he's getting ahead faster than all of us. What lie were we fed in business school?
Right. And I like John Hurd in this movie. I think his character is the closest thing the movie gets to a quote traditional antagonist. Yeah. But again, I think to your point, it doesn't need it. I mean, the antagonism is going to come from the negative emotions that Tom Hanks's character will undoubtedly begin to feel by being a 13-year-old in a 32-year-old's body. That's right. And that's enough. And like, that's more than enough. And I'm glad that that's all the movie feels like antagonistically it needs.
Right. And it's almost less an antagonist and more as I talk about this sometime in my class, where you've got a main character and the other characters around that main character are sometimes there just to provide contrasting colors so you can see the main character more clearly and also see the themes. So John Hurd has to be there to represent, here's the track most men are on. They grow up, and especially in the 80s, there's this expectation in New York and on Wall Street or whatever in business that you're just going to be an absolute murderer, And it's like, well, if we've got this guy who's totally innocent, it's going to pop a lot more if you put, it's like, well, here's the track that Josh could have been on. If he had never gone through this little adventure, he might have just grown up and gone to college and turned into a jerk and turned into John Hurd.
Right. And I think that's
that's
it,
like,
right?
Okay.
I mean, that's like, the whole point, right?
Yeah,
like
it helps us love Tom Hanks because it's showing us an aspect of late 80s, sort of consumer culture that even then we knew was bullshit. And it's like, yeah, it's great to just have a bunch of shit and buy things and Ronald Reagan and whoop-de-doo. But is that really where you want to be for the rest of your life? Is that what's going to, put you in a coffin by the time you're 49? Because you just can't take it anymore. And then, of course, and so Elizabeth Perkins, if you've got Tom Hanks over here and John Hurd over here, Elizabeth Perkins moves in the movie over here. She moves toward Tom Hanks. By the time the movie ends, she's not a child, but she's been given sort of a new view of what her life could be. And so she breaks up with John Hurd and says, you know what? I don't want to be a miserable, clawing, ladder climbing asshole. I would actually like there to be wonder and joy in my life. And so she changes in the movie. She gets, because this thing happened, magic came into her life. Tom Hanks has this experience with an adult as a child that forces him to sort of rise to the limits of the maturity that he could possibly be expected to rise to as a 13-year-old, even in an adult's body. And I think the movie ends, and it's so heartbreaking. It's just such a beautiful visual when he's in the suit and it's just too big for him, and he's going home, and he runs, and the shoes are left behind. And I mean, I was crying. But the thing is, and I bet you thought the same thing I did. It's like, I love who he's going to grow up to be.
Right, exactly. And like
he learned some stuff, and he's not going to grow up into a bad guy. When he actually is 30, he's going to be a good mixture of mature adult and he will have not lost that child part.
So I guess my question to you is the moral of the story never lose the child within?
Yeah, kind of. And I think it was a very resonant populist storyline or theme in the 80s.
Right.
I think it's evergreen. Like, I think you could always tell a version of that story. I think you do. Elf does it,
We talked about Bruce Willis. Remember the Bruce Willis movie where he interacts with the child version of himself, aptly titled The Kid? I mean, it's literally Bruce Willis said, I don't remember who that young actor is, but it's like he's interacting with his child selves through some turn of fantastical realism.
Yeah. Yeah. There's always, adults will always love stories about, hey, you've taken your eye off the ball, and we've gotten caught up in the rat race. And don't you remember how fun it used to be when we were unburdened young people? It's romantic. It doesn't really reflect reality. Being a kid is tough. And some people didn't like childhood. I didn't. I don't have a hugely romantic view of my carefree youth. But on a larger sense, you can understand on a daily basis, you don't need to play the script that is written for you by society, which is be angry, be cynical, be outraged, be scared and paranoid about your neighbor. You don't have to. You don't have to play any script. You can find an aspect of yourself that can sustain you. And that's certainly what goes on in my life. I mean, part of what I have to do every day is, okay, it's time for make-believe, and that can either be a burden or it can be a joy. You can either sit there and going, we got to get this fucking script done by Friday, or you can go, all right, what happens next? And that's actually a quicker way to get the script done by Friday.
Well, and I mean, look, I consider myself immensely grateful to be able to do what I do for a living, which most people would consider to be fun, getting to sit and talk with your friends about the things that you love. But like you said, I mean, whenever I get upset about this job, I just think to myself, I have to stay up until 2 a.m. recording, but I get to do the thing that I get to do that I want. So like, is it
right?
It's a complaint, but only in as much as like, right. All right. But like, you get it. Like let's just get to it. Like, let's hop to it. Like
you could be staying up till 2 a.m. doing, insurance adjustment assessments or whatever.
Right.
You're doing a lot of shit you don't care about at all.
Right.
And people stay up late at night doing that too.
Right. And they love it because that's what they love. But this is what I love, which is why I'm not complaining.
Or they don't love it, but that's the job they have. So they do it, and they sit around wishing they were me or you.
Right. Or a version of themselves that they wish they had been when they were the age that he is in this movie. Because again, I mean, it's wish fulfillment in both directions, right? Child fulfilling the wish as an adult, and the adult fulfilling the wish of feeling like a child again. Because that's the thing about the movie towards the end that I started feeling more the message was meant to be received, obviously, as the adults watching it, because it's a movie for adults, but like it resonates with kids. I have to feel like, right?
Oh yeah.
But the message feels more easier received as an adult and more adult specific, even more than it probably leads on.
Right. I think there are parts that a child, let's say a 13-year-old would respond to, but yeah, of course it is for adults to look at and go, yeah. I mean, now look, there are plenty of women. I think Susan is probably one of them who sort of make fun of the notion that, oh, look, she's dating a man who actually acts like a 13-year-old.
Right. A man.
That's every guy I've ever met.
Right. A man. I don't know how to do the dishes. I don't know how to cook. I don't know how to do the laundry, which we know is a lie for both of us. We both know how to do the laundry.
Oh, the charming man child. Whoopee, But yeah. I get what you're saying, but still.
But if it was Tom Hanks, the charming man child, ain't nobody have a problem with that, apparently. I see now. If it's me or you, it's a problem. But if it's Tom Hanks, well, all bets are off.
Now the movie, the female version of this, Garner,
Jennifer Garner.
Jennifer Garner, thank you. 13 going on 30. I've never seen. Have you seen that?
No.
And I wonder, I'm curious now because I haven't really heard one way or the other. I don't have a feeling in my head of oh, that was a good movie or a bad movie or people loved it or didn't love it. But I'm curious the differences when you're talking about a 13-year-old girl who becomes a 30-year-old woman and then lives as a 30-year-old woman for a while. What are the lessons there? And now I'm really curious.
Isn't that when she goes into the future though, right?
I don't know. I don't know if it's exactly or
no. In that one, she's in 87, and then she wishes to be old, and then she's older in the future. It's not she's older in the time period.
Oh, so she just quickly grows up into the 30-year-old.
She wakes up. She wishes for it one night, and the next morning she wakes up, and she's like, "Oh my God, I'm Jennifer Garner now." And it's 2004.
So her parents are older and her friends are older.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's how you get away from not just being a big ripoff.
And having, and mind you, having even stranger relationship issues to run around with, because that presents its whole host of problems.
Yeah.
With the, I'm a 13-year-old woman in a 30-year-old woman's body, because we were talking about Tom Hanks and Elizabeth Perkins being weird. The other option is less pleasant to even have to try and deal with, because I don't think there's a good way in dealing with that one either.
Yeah, it's weird. Like people were a lot less squeamish about teenage sexuality in the 80s. It felt like, oh, we're finally just accepting that teenagers have sexual feelings and teenagers have sex, and let's all just get over ourselves, which is a little strange considering there was a deadly sexually transmitted disease, which was dominating every moment of every person's life. This feeling of, wait a second, sex is dangerous. But there was a part of this sort of equal and opposite part of the society in the 80s that was also saying, let's all just get over ourselves. People have sex, just deal with it. And let's, so no one was squeamish. Like I was more squeamish watching the movie now than I was when I was 22.
Right. It's a society's different. I'm not sure how, if you made this movie today, you would approach that. I think it would be maybe best to not even approach it and just do the other things that would be interesting to have a 13-year-old approach in 2023 time. Like that would be more interesting. And again, like the relationship stuff, it's like, it's not that it's not good in this movie, but like it works in this movie because it was made in the 80s. Like that is part of this that works because it was made in the 80s. Like,
right.
Just like Revenge of the Nerds, like that movie has some problematic stuff with the sexual content in that movie, but it's kind of given a pass because it came out in the 80s. But if that came out now, nobody would be laughing at some of those scenes that take place later in that movie.
Well, think of it this way. This movie is approximately 35 years old. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So in 1988, 35 years before 1988 was 1952. If it was 1988 and I was watching a movie that was made in 1952, I would not be watching it going, why aren't they acting like I do now? I go, okay, I'm looking at a very different culture.
Right.
And you go back a few years before that and you're in the 40s. I mean, no one watches movies from the 30s and 40s and 50s and says, well, why aren't they treating, where are all the, they're not very, understanding of, diversity and people who are different. It's like, they weren't. It's like, you're right. That's absolutely correct. They were not. There should, I wonder why there weren't more people of color.
Right.
The media of the time, women that way. It's like
the media of the time tends to reflect the time that it's being made in. Shocking, I know.
And yes, it can be shocking and upsetting to see women treated the way they are often treated in movies as you go back through the decades. But part of that just has to be, in a way, well, kind of thank God that's changed. But okay, now that I've made the simple observation that things weren't the same in the 80s or the 50s or the 30s as they are now, what were they then? And what story were they trying to tell? And in what ways were they ahead of their own time or behind their own time or simply reflective of their time? You just look at it that way. And so looked at that way, and it's easy for me because I was alive and conscious and basically mature adult when I saw the movie in the 80s. It's a little easier to remember before 75 movies like this one were made because this was the first one. So
you're asking people to remove themselves from the feelings they have on something, subjectivity. What? No, being subjective is what I want. I would never be objective about anything. I mean, I'm with you. Like, yeah. It's like anything else. It's like the conversation of the art and the artist, right? Like, I can never watch a whatever Roman Polanski movie again. It's like, yeah, he's a terrible person. Nobody can question that or whatever the hell you feelings are on Roman Polanski. But watch the movie and let's talk about the movie because, like you said, we have to be honest. It's like we did it. It's just that's what happened, and you can look it up and see information. And just like with this, like you can go watch plenty of movies that were doing the same thing this movie was doing at the time. Think about something like Airplane. The movie's rated PG, and there are full-on bare breasts exposed on the screen at one point for more than a split second, and not by accident. It was the intent of the filmmakers. Yeah. And that movie's rated PG. If the wrong person were to show it to the wrong family in this day and age, there would be cancel Airplane. It's like, you fucking yoy. But you know what I mean? Because cancel Blazing Saddles comes up every couple years, and it's like, guys, you've not just missed the point, but you're fucking flying off the cliff into the void on the other side. It's again, the intent of the filmmakers has to be viewed somewhat. Yes, it's a cop out in a way, but it's also being honest about when it was made and who made it. And the time and the place and the culture surrounding it cannot be removed from a lot of these movies. Dare I say you can't remove it from a movie at all in a lot of ways.
Right. And you should be able to have your own subjective feeling, experience that, and then in parallel have another experience where you're able to go, okay, but keeping all that in mind or even setting it aside, what are these movies? But what is this movie's politics? And what is it trying to say? And what is it doing? And what is the way it's doing? And you may, by the way, come out in the exact same place and go, that movie's fucked up. That movie's politics suck.
Right.
You certainly can. I mean, that in the 80s, believe me, there was a lot of egregious, dumb, movies that were,
Thomas Howell is the soul man.
Yeah, that even when you strip away everything, it's still dumb and offensive. And you may get there.
Right.
But sort of do both at the same time and see, Well,
and I mean, that's what makes what we do, what we're doing now, what it is. Like you being able to be subjective and objective at the same time, but not forcing yourself to be just one or the other. Because subjectivity and objectivity, the line is blurred and or gone nowadays. So again, like objectively, this is a really well-made movie, and I subjectively also really enjoyed it. It's really weird. I felt like I'd already seen this movie, and I know I had. It felt like I knew it's the sign of a really well-made movie and a competently made movie that knows its place in the panopticon of cinema, that it can draw from all these other things, distill it down into its movie. And it feels like a movie you've seen before. This movie, I swear to God, I've never seen it, but I knew every beat before they happened because it's just that competently made. It's just again, like you said, Penny Marshall doesn't get enough credit, and I'm not going to say it's a perfect movie, but I mean, it might be. It's probably in that conversation.
I'm struggling to find scenes in this movie that I feel like, if that's the one thing that hasn't aged well, or that was like a weird pandering to a 80s trend that I don't think we needed. There's not a lot. I mean, like if I had to cut something out of the movie, you put a gun to my head, I might cut the squash game between John Hurd and Tom Hanks. But then I'm sort of like, well, what was that scene? What were we getting?
Right.
Like, why was that scene there? And for me, it's John Hurd had to find a way to to best Tom Hanks.
Right.
And if I can't do it in the boardroom, I'll do it on the squash court. And the way they play it out is really interesting because John Hurd gets frustrated, so he cheats, which is a very 80s sort of like, oh yeah, the rich, East Coast prep school, Ivy League douchebag, Wall Street cheats. Okay, right? And then it turns into a back and forth. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. And then it just devolves into just the most childish, give me that ball. No. And I'm going to keep the ball away from you. And I'm going to roll around on the ground and keep it in. Now they're fighting on the ground. And it's like, oh, this is brilliant. You're further elucidating the childishness of this guy, because not knowing it, he's reducing himself to the level of a 13-year-old and
more visibly
on that level. More
visibly than he normally has been, but it ties right back into what Elizabeth Perkins says.
Right. And it takes 5 seconds and he's on the ground rolling around fighting this guy. And it's like, yet another way to tell the theme. Who's the 13-year-old here? He came out here to prove he was the bigger man. And within 5 minutes, he's rolling around on the ground going, give me the ball. Come on. And it's like,
I didn't say that. I wasn't cheating.
Yeah, no, I didn't. No, I didn't. And it's like, all right, okay, point made. This wasn't just a scene of, hey, let's do some funny comedy. It fed the story, fed character, fed theme, and I'm like, okay, well, there you go. It's you can make an argument.
I think the only thing for me, and I wouldn't cut it out, but it's maybe the weird anachronism of this movie, is the first night, and you kind of mentioned it already, that Tom Hanks spends in that hotel. That feels more like 70s New York than it does 80s New York, down to the Paul Herman schizo, I'm going to kill that bitch. I'm going to kill that bitch, which, by the way, we can kind of let a little cat out of the bag. There may be a Sopranos podcast coming your way at some point later this year that Richard and I will be doing with some friends of ours. There are a lot of Sopranos cast members in this movie, including Paul Herman, who plays the schizo. I'm going to kill that bitch. I'm going to kill that bitch. Because he's also in Goodfellas. Ooh. Also, Peter McRobbie is in this movie, who's in The Sopranos. Also, John Hurd, who's in The Sopranos, and Robert Loggia, who's in The Sopranos.
Yeah, for sure.
But that scene is the only thing in the entire movie that strikes me as odd, and that kind of way it plays out, because that feels like 70s Times Square, New York, not 1988. But the vibe was a lot different in 88. Even I know that.
It was, but it was less from 78 to 88 is less of a change than 88 to 98.
Fair.
New York in the 80s was still a lot of drugs, a lot of, crack, a lot of, they were making a point, of course. They were, and it was a funny joke going from the actor's name, the French Connection.
Never seen
the guy, God.
I've never seen the French Connection. Does that? I will cut this out.
Gene Hackman. Okay, thank you. God, it took me long enough. The Gene Hackman movie where people are shooting at each other and then he turns it off and it's like the soundtrack is still playing right outside his window. And so it's a joke, but it's like, now it would make no sense. Then it still sort of made some sense.
Right.
So.
I just like Paul Herman. I'm going to kill that bitch. I'm going to get that bitch. Right. I'm going to get that bitch. I mean,
but seriously, how terrified would you be as a 13-year-old? You'd be friggin'
Oh, fuck no. Hell no. Yeah, I'm not going to stay overnight for sure. Yikes. So, Richard, final thoughts on Big?
Well, as anyone who's been listening knows, for me, it's seeing it in 88, maybe seeing it once since then, and then seeing it today. And happy to report it really does hold up. I think anyone, if there was a person in their 20s, who hadn't seen it, I would say watch it for Tom Hanks's performance, and also watch it for the strength of its screenplay and its direction. And yes, it feels like an 80s movie at certain moments, but there's a lot of 80s movies that are not worth a rewatch. This one is, and the emotion, the laughs are solid, and the emotion at the end. I mean, I'm sorry. Maybe it's just where I am right now, but I was emotional. I was crying at the end. So I say watch Big. I may not have had the same emotional reaction you did viscerally, but
I could 100% understand how you could have gotten there because I was close. Because again, I'm the same character. I am the same character I've always been. But I'm the same age as Tom Hanks is in this movie, and the actual age that he is when this film is being made. He's 32. I'm 32 now, and some of the 30s ism stuff does still hold up. You know, the losing sight of your childhood, and like this is more important. And so like I get it, and those are the moments that resonated with me. And like you said, it is an 80s movie, and there are so many things in this movie that work because it's an 80s movie, and there are not a whole lot of things that don't work that are because of it being an 80s movie. But to your point, this is a movie that is not only worth watching now, but it's a movie that I think will continue to persist long after we're all dead, because it's a movie that there aren't very many, if any, movies that do it better than this one. And again, we talked about it. There is no one like Tom Hanks, and there probably never will be until there is, but it doesn't happen automatically, and it has to happen organically, and it happens over an entire career. Because again, like we said, Tom Hanks at one point was known for comedies. Ask a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old now a Tom Hanks movie they've seen, it'll be Toy Story and maybe Polar Express, which are not, again, they're not even movies where you see him in reality. I mean, Polar Express, it's him in that weird thing that I'm glad they don't do anymore, those digital actor recreation things that Zemeckis was really all over for a while.
Yeah.
But like Tom Hanks is not known for something like this anymore. And to see this, I would love to see this as a 13-year-old now, to see how it would be received. Because again, it's Tom Hanks, and he's like a folk hero at this point in a way that nobody else in the industry even is. So I'm glad I watched it. Again, I was kind of leading on that I didn't like it, but I was more just trying to just get a rise out of you because, sometimes it's funny.
Well, because I called this movie. You're telling me, and this was one somehow I was like, oh, you're doing Tom Hanks? Are you doing Big? Oh my God. And you're like, great. You want to do it? Do it.
Yeah. So I'm glad I watched it. Now I can say I've seen it. But again, like it's such a well-made, competently shot and directed and just edited. And even the music, we wouldn't even mention it's Howard Shore for fuck's sake. But, Howard Shore also. And again, then you've got Tom Hanks. Like it's a perfect movie. It's not a movie I think I'll rewatch anytime soon, but I'm glad I've seen it. So Richard, until the next time we do one of these, where could people find you kicking around the internet? Where have you set up shop on the internet right now?
Well, I'm still on Twitter. You can find me there. I do check in, but I'm finding that I'm spending less time on Twitter just because it's not as much fun. But that aside, you can find if you want to watch Titans, it's on HBO Max. You can watch seasons 1, 2, and 3 in their entirety. You can watch the first half of season 4, our final season, and the final 6 episodes, I think, are dropping in April of 2023. So check it out. You can very soon be able to watch the whole series front to back, and I think you'll like it.
Front to back is the way you're supposed to wipe.
Wow.
That's the only other time I hear anyone use the term front to back. Richard.
I don't know what your hidden message is about Titans, but I don't like
it. I have seen 0 episodes of your show, which is even worse thing to admit out loud when your friend is sitting here across from you. He's gonna put on the theatrics, folks, but he's never responded this way when I've told him this all the other times.
Your dance card is pretty busy when it comes to watching stuff.
Speaking of my dance card being busy, you can find all of my dancing, my soft shoeing, as it were, over at weirdingwaymedia.com, which is the podcast network that yours truly and the projection booths, Mike White set up August of last year. And we invited all of our cool friends to join us. So if you want to hear some cool people talking about cool stuff, including 80s TV Ladies, which is a show all about TV shows from the 80s, with ladies, hosted by ladies. Jesus Christ, what's going on here? We're on brand, folks. And the projection booth and all kinds of other things. You can find those over at weirdingwaymedia.com. As for this show, patreon.com/culturecast. Financially, if you want to, I totally get it if you don't. Just rate, review, and like the show on iTunes or wherever you get it. Richard, thank you so much. Yeah, you're right. You did get to pick this, which is like a rarity.
It is.
But maybe it'll become more common. Who knows?
Yeah, no. I'm glad you watched it. I'm glad you liked it.
And as always, we'll catch you on the next episode.